If your last name is on this list, your ancestor didn't just live through the disappearance of the lost colony. They may have walked out of it alive and started a bloodline that's still breathing today. These 10 surnames appear on the actual 1587 Roanoke colonist roster, the list Governor John White carried across the ocean, copied down by the geographer Richard Hakluyt in 1589, and they resurface centuries later in the family records of the Lumbee people of Robeson County, North Carolina. And most families who carry them today have no idea their name might be the closest thing left to a 400-year-old mystery ever being solved. Stay until number 1, because that surname belongs to a baby whose birth was erased from history within days of the most famous one in America. Start with a name almost nobody recognizes. Wiles, sometimes recorded as Wiles or Willers, one of the men on White's 1587 roster. Unlike the names further down this list, no solid documentary trail connects a Wiles directly to Robeson County. This one sits on the unconfirmed side of the ledger, a name on the original roster with no clear afterlife in the historical record. Which is worth knowing going in. Not every name that vanished on Roanoke reappears later. Some threads just end. That's exactly why the names that do reappear matter so much more. Next, Scott, an English surname carried by one of the 1587 colonists, from a root meaning simply a Scotsman or someone descended from Scottish settlers in England. Like Wiles, the Robeson County connection here is thinner. Scott is common enough in both English and Lumbee family records that on its own, it proves about as much as Brown does further down this list. Filed here as a real name from the real roster, not as strong evidence. 2 names down, and already you can feel the difference between documented and just a name. Now the 2 men with shovels who turned maybe into something harder. For centuries, the theory that they survived sat as a footnote. Then 2 men with shovels turned it into something harder. On Hatteras Island, near the village of Buxton, a local historian named Scott Dawson, whose family roots run 3 centuries deep on that island, and a British archaeologist, Dr. Mark Horton of the University of Bristol, spent more than a decade digging through the trash heaps of the old Croatoan town. Their reasoning, if the English assimilated, the proof wouldn't be in a grand fort. It would be in the garbage middens of the native village, where English and Croatoan life blurred together. In 2025, they announced what they call the smoking gun buckets of Hammerscale. Tiny flakes of iron, smaller than a grain of rice, that fall to the ground only when someone is forging metal at a blacksmith's fire. The Croatoan didn't work iron at that heat. The English did. Mixed in beside it, in pure 16th century soil, they found slag, melted glass, a repurposed gun barrel, and an ornament stamped with a Tudor rose. Coins and sword hilts could always be explained away as trade goods. Hammerscale cannot be traded. It only falls where the forge actually burned. In the same soil, they traced the post holes and fire pit of a Croatoan longhouse, with English iron resting in the dirt where a native home once stood. Horton's reading is blunt. English settlers were living and working in that village for decades, and their grandchildren went on living there into the early 1700s. That's where the surnames come in. When those English settlers married into the Croatoan, their descendants carried English names inland over the next century while. Because the colony was heavily male, on the order of 90 men to 17 women, the maternal lines ran entirely Croatoan, and the surnames rode down the centuries intact, father to son. Exactly as an assimilation should look in the historical record. Now the names that actually left a trail. Listen for your own. John Sampson sailed in 1587 as one of Governor White's 12 assistant senior men, trusted to help run the colony. The name is Old English, a form of Samuel, carried into common use through generations of English record-keeping. Sampson turns up centuries later among the Indian families of the North Carolina Sandhills, in the very counties, Robeson and Sampson, where the Lumbee took root. The county name and the family surname are likely separate coincidences, not proof of each other, but the surname bridging 300 years, colonist to community, is documented on both ends. A colonist on the roster, a family in Robeson County. the same name spanning 3 centuries. That's the pattern you're going to hear again and again tonight. If your name is Sampson, your ancestor was trusted enough to help govern a colony that vanished, and his name didn't vanish with it. On the original roster, the spelling is Bailey. The man is Roger Bailey, another of White's assistants, trusted to hold the settlement together. Bailey comes from Old French bailli, a royal official, a bailiff, literally one who holds authority in a district. Among the Lumbee, the name comes down as Bailey and Berry, still common in the community today. Bailey is a name you could find in any English village, then and now. So, on its own, it carries little weight. Hold that thought. The gap between a common name and a rare one is going to matter enormously before we reach number 1. This one carries a lesson in how history gets corrected. An 1880s researcher's list recorded a colonist as Alice Chapman. When later historians went back to Hakluyt's original 1589 printing, the name was actually Alice Chapman, a copying error fixed only by returning to the source instead of trusting the copy. Chapman comes from Old English cheap man, literally market man. A trader, a Spanish pilot named Pedro Diaz, who separately knew these waters, also recorded a Chapman among the Englishmen left on this coast. The surname survives among Robeson County families today. One more thread running from the roster to the river. Here the story gets a face. The roster carries the name Berry, listed among the 1,587 assistants. Berry comes from Old English beru, meaning a grove or clearing, a topographic surname given to a family who lived near one. Lumbee tradition holds that a colonist named Henry Berry was left on Roanoke Island, and that his line ran straight into Robeson County. 2.5 centuries later, that same name produced one of the most famous figures in Lumbee history, Henry Berry Lowry, the outlaw leader who fought a guerrilla war across these swamps during and after the Civil War, defending his people against white vigilantes. In 1872, Henry Berry Lowry simply disappeared, never captured, never explained, as completely as the colonists themselves. If your name is Berry, your ancestor's name didn't just survive 4 centuries, it became legend twice over. Time for honesty, because this list doesn't reward hype. Brown is on the colonist roster, and Brown is everywhere among the Lumbee. But Brown is also one of the most common surnames in the entire English-speaking world. Finding a Brown in Robeson County tells you almost nothing, the same way finding a Smith wouldn't. This is the trap that swallows a lot of online genealogy. A common name matching a common name isn't evidence, it's arithmetic. The names that actually carry weight are the rare ones, so unusual that finding them twice in exactly the right place is hard to explain by chance. Keep that in mind, because the final 3 are exactly that kind of name. Before we reach them, understand why anyone believed this at all, beyond the roster and the dig site. In 1709, explorer John Lawson published an account of traveling this coast, and he wrote down something that has haunted researchers since. The Hatteras Indians told him several of their ancestors were white people who could, in his words, talk in a book the way the English did. He noticed grey eyes among them, and among no other native people he met. They spoke of a phantom ship still sailing their waters, which they called Sir Walter Raleigh's ship. Some wore English dress. Lawson had no doubt what he was looking at. Descendants of the colonists hiding in plain sight, 120 years after the carved post. He wasn't the first to notice. Years earlier, as the Jamestown settlers raised their fort in Virginia in 1607, a colonist named George Percy recorded seeing a native boy of about 10 with a head of perfectly yellow hair and pale skin, which he called a miracle among the people. There, Jamestown stood only about 150 miles north of Roanoke, a blonde child in the right place, exactly 1 generation after the colony vanished. In the 1880s, a North Carolina legislator named Hamilton Macmillan laid the original 1587 roster beside the family names of the Robeson County community and counted more than 20, surnames common to both. Worth knowing, Macmillan drew up that list in the middle of a hard political fight over Lumbee schools and tribal recognition. which doesn't make the overlap false, but it means the comparison itself has a history worth knowing. Now the final three, the rare ones. This one will break your heart a little. Dionys Harvey was a colonist on the 1587 roster, and his wife gave birth on Roanoke Island that same August, only days after Eleanor Dare, to a second English baby, whose name and sex were never written down. Harvey comes from an old Breton name meaning battle-worthy, carried into England after the Norman conquest. History remembers Virginia Dare and forgets the Harvey child entirely. Two infants born within days of each other, at the edge of the known world, both swallowed by the same silence. The Harvey name, rare specific, turns up later among the Carolina families said to descend from the colony. A baby with no name, and a surname that refused to die. Christopher Cooper was one of Governor White's assistants, and he came within an inch of a completely different fate. When the colony begged White to sail back to England for supplies, Cooper was first chosen to go in his place. He agreed, then overnight changed his mind and stayed. Cooper is occupational Middle English for a maker of barrels and casks. That single decision left him on Roanoke with the others, and out of history forever. Coopers appear among the Lumbee in real numbers, and older chroniclers named the Coopers alongside the Dares and Harveys as families who kept to themselves and held their line down the generations, a tradition, not a document. A man who almost escaped, and a surname that stayed behind to be found. And now number one. Of course, it's Dare. Ananias Dare and his wife Eleanor John White's own daughter sailed in 1587. On August 18th, Eleanor gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born on American soil. White held his granddaughter once, then sailed for England and never saw her again. When he finally fought his way back 3 years later, on what should have been her third birthday, she was gone, with all the rest. Dare comes from Old English, likely a byname for someone considered bold, fittingly, for a family that vanished into the unknown. For 400 years, Virginia Dare has been America's first ghost, painted into murals, stamped onto products, a baby frozen forever at 10 days old. But the name itself didn't vanish. Among the Lumbee, it comes down, softened by time, spoken as Dial, Durant, and Dorman. A man named Dial appears on the muster roll of a Robeson County company that served in the War of 1812. Native soldiers carrying a lost colony name into a new country's army. If you carry the name Dare, or Dial, or Durant, you're standing closer to that carved post than you ever imagined. Here's the honest secret. Confirmed only in the last few decades, a genetic genealogist named Roberta Estes has spent years running the Lost Colony DNA project, testing Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA from people who carry these surnames, trying to match them back to colonist families still living in England. It hasn't produced a confirmed match yet. Estes herself warns that DNA is not a magic bullet. The carved post, the hammer scale, the grey-eyed accounts Lawson wrote down in 1709. All of it points the same direction. None of it on its own. Put your own great-great-grandmother's grandmother on that island. So is the lost colony actually you? Here's the honest answer. Because this channel lives and dies on telling you the truth instead of the thrill. The surname overlap is real, it's striking, and for the rare names, it's genuinely hard to wave away. But it's suggestive evidence, not proof. No document ties the Lumbee to Roanoke before Macmillan's 1880s list, and respected scholars, including Lumbee historian Melinda Maynor Lowry, remain skeptical of the lost colony link. And they're right to insist the Lumbee are a people with their own deep, distinct identity, not a footnote to someone else's English mystery. The colonists are one possible strand in that story, never the whole rope. It's also worth saying plainly, a lot of what we call the mystery was manufactured later. The eerie, unsolvable vanishing you grew up with was hardened into legend by a 1937 outdoor drama written to draw tourists to the Outer Banks during the Depression, a show that still runs every summer. Scott Dawson puts it bluntly, the Lost Colony story was a marketing campaign. To the people of Hatteras and Robeson County, their ancestors were never lost at all. They knew exactly where they went. If your family name is Dare, Cooper, Harvey, or Berry, you're not holding proof of a lost colony bloodline. You're holding a thread worth pulling. A shared name is a starting point, never a conclusion. The real check is documented genealogy, parish by parish, census by census, and a DNA test that can carry the line back across the water. Do that work, and you might find the thread runs into a dead end. Or you might find the colony everyone called lost has been sitting quietly in your family Bible the whole time, never lost at all, just waiting for someone to finally read the name out loud. Drop your surname in the comments and tell me, did you know?